something too with how Lisa was bringing up kind of with the burnout and stuff like that, PTSD within service. Do you almost find that for some locations with police officers, it is such a go between either domestics, murders, car accidents, and things like that, that there's so much that you can kind of wall yourself off before it becomes now detrimental to your service as a cop and then as a father, a son, daughter, everything else that comes with it. If you could have your dream world of how cops went into it and maybe how then they would start transitioning before any kind of real retirement time, before being like, oh, I'm a homicide detective and it's retirement day and now I'm a civilian again. How would you change that a bit so that there is kind of a phasing out program for officers to kind of decompress before they get back into the civilian world?
Now, this is a great question, and I've got the answer because I've actually seen one of my colleagues do this. I think he did 35 or 40 years of service. And what he's been doing for the last 5 years of service is he's been knocking 1 day of work off every single sort of year. So it's like a 5-year cycle. So there'll be, I think he's now gone, but by the time he'd left, he was only actually working a day and a half within the department rules. And it was like a slow sort of burnout. So he was still doing stuff with the guys and the girls on the floor, and he was still doing search warrants and everything else. But by the same token, he was doing this complete sort of about face where he was helping his wife do the gardening at home and everything else. So he was slowly easing into his retirement, because I know, and I'm dreading the day, but there's a real big moment, and I'm spoken to lots of ex-veterans that I know and first responders, where they leave their job and they lose their identity because all of a sudden they go from being Constable Bryan to just Bryan, and all of a sudden it's like, what do I do with myself? I've got nothing to do, or people don't understand me because I talk about stuff. So I think the gentleman I'm talking about, he did it the best way possible. And I'm looking to emulate his footsteps if the department will let me do it. And I realise that it might not be possible for all departments, but certainly by taking a little bit of time out towards the end of your career, not those big, as we all seen them, I'm going to take a 6 weeks cruise and then I'll come back. Yeah. And they do the 6 week cruise and then they come back and it's like, right, so this is retirement. What am I doing? Whereas he, just a slow burn. He had interests, he had pastimes, he had hobbies, he'd joined clubs. It was, to be fair, it was probably one of the best endings of a career I've ever seen.
But even if you could go just to part-time, right? Like 2.5, 3 days a week, just to sort of start to edge yourself out a little bit and, have time to find and build those hobbies and, get into volunteer programs or mentorship programs or whatever else that you plan on using for, to take up some of your time and give you that purpose on the other side of your career, in order to, so that when you do finally get out and retire, you at least have something that seems familiar. And I think, that's the biggest thing. And I mean, you and I have talked about this with John, right? John was in the transition program, but he was in the transition program during COVID. So he went from being on base 5 days a week to never being on base and barely talking to anybody. And then we lost him. And so that sudden switch off really really messes with your mind and your identity. And, I'm kind of going through that a little bit myself right now, which is bizarre. But, I went from working nearly 80 hours a week. And then at the end of November, I quit my job and I started a consulting business. And now I work 8 hours a week and I'm trying to figure out what the heck to do with my life. Because I realized I didn't really have that many hobbies, and now being on the West Coast, I got Bryan pretty close, but and now I can fly to you, Bri. Exactly. Much easier. But you look at these things, and when your life shakes up like that in such a big way, it can really play with your mind and the way that you see yourself and value yourself, and it's a challenge to redirect the messaging into something positive and hopeful, I guess.